We are about to explore a key built-in feature out of the beloved language of choice, Python. In today's episode, we're going to dive into class methods as I break this down for you guys to further your Python understanding. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of PyPod Chronicles.
Welcome to PyPod Chronicles, a series that brings our tech blog to life in a whole new way. Covering an array of topics surrounding Python and tech, from programming tips, best practices, and so much more. Let's get immersed in Python with the Nerd Nook on the go.
Python decorators are like special add-ons that make your code better and easier to understand. In today's episode, you'll dive deep into a decorator that not only enhances your code, but furthers your own development. As in last week's episode, you were introduced to the creation process of decorators. And besides crafting our own, Python has many built-in decorators we can use and put to use to further open up and expand on our existing code base. Guys, each week I dive into Python and I break it down into bite-sized, understandable pieces for you guys. All that complex tech jargon. But here's the kicker. While everyone gets just a taste, my premium subscribers get the whole feast. Don't miss out on the full experience. Join me in the Nerd Nook Premium Pro. Head down to the link in the description, guys. That's all my free resources as well as premium if you're interested, right? But I have free courses out for you guys. I have a weekly Python newsletter, this podcast, as well as a lot more, all right? So I have something for all my learners. If you're a visual learner, I have YouTube. If you're a reader, I have the newsletter. If you're a listener, I have the podcast. You name it, I got it. Head on down there and show your support. And whatever platform you're listening on, it would be a big help if you do me a favor. Click the heart, click the like button, right? And then reshare this if you can. If you're in Substack, that's the restack button. That helps more listeners find this podcast. Thank you guys for listening to PyPod. Now, in today's guide, in today's episode, you'll only dive into one of these built-in decorators. I'm going to talk about what it's for, how you use it, and why it's useful. And once you get the hang of using this decorator, you're going to be writing faster, cleaner code. Before we talk about class method, I want to touch on real quick the basic. What is a Python decorator in case you missed last week's episode? It's essential to grasp the fundamental concept of decorators in Python. Now, decorators are essentially functions that modify the behavior of other functions or methods. And they allow for the augmentation of existing code, existing functions, without altering their core functionality, thereby enhancing code readability, maintainability, as well as efficiency. Now, in last week's article and the episode of PyPod, right, I broke this down in great detail, all right? So head on back and check that out, right? But the key concept is a Python decorator allows us to add functionality to an existing function. It does not alter the core state of the function, the initial one. Popular built-in ones that you've probably heard of before is static method, property, wraps, or LRU caching, right? All of these help optimize our code and are useful tools for specific tasks. But the one that I didn't mention yet that we're talking about today is class method. And my goal today is to break down class methods for you and express why these little buggers are ready to go out of the box and how we can use them to build out our code. So you heard me say it a few times. Class method, class method. What is a class method? The class method decorator is a bit like a static method, right? So first, wait. A static method is literally just a function in a class, okay? It's not an instance method. So imagine a folder, and the folder is called math. And inside the folder, I have 4 functions: add, subtract, multiply, divide. The only reason these functions are in this class is just to organize my code, but I can use it just like a normal function. That is a static method, relatively short. Okay, so now a class method, it's a bit like a static method, but it gets a reference to the class as its first argument. Now, usually this first argument is called CLS, which stands for class. So instead of giving it self, which we use for instance methods, we give it CLS. We can use class methods to make methods that work on the class itself. Like I said, not just on instances of the class. What this really means to you is the method can mess around with variables and properties that belong to a class. This is really handy for things like creating new objects or using different ways to build them. You can view it like this if you want. All right. A class method, it's like a factory method in a production line. They're responsible for creating new instances of objects based on certain parameters. What's the purpose for this, you may ask? Well, the purpose for this is it's for making methods that mess around with the class, not just an object or an instance of the class. Now becomes, how does this work? Instead of getting an instance, we give the method CLS as the first argument. That way it can mess around with classy stuff. These could be our class variables, right? Now, if we make a class, I could create a few class variables, and then you could create a constructor method, right? In the method, you might have a property or so, all right? And then any other method after that, I could call a class method. So I simply just make a method, I give the argument CLS, I link the class method decorator just above it. So think of a class managing different users. I'm going to touch on this later here. So a class that manages different users, each requiring a specialized constructor. By decorating a method with class method, we can create a flexible factory that selects the appropriate constructor based on parameters passed to it. This enhances code maintainability and the extensibility of your code. I mentioned factory methods, but let me show you a different example that made more sense to me. Now, close your eyes. Picture this. Picture yourself building a web app where you have different kinds of users. There's regular users, you have the administrators, the admins, and the moderators. Each type of user has its own set of tasks. So like regular users can view the content. Administrators could manage the users and could manage the content. Then you have moderators, and moderators can moderate user activities. So to make this work in Python, we need to start by creating a class, like a class called user. But now we need a way to make instances of each type of user without all that hassle. This is where class methods become really useful. So imagine we have a class called user. I have a constructor method with two properties, username and email. And then I create three other methods in my class. I have regular user, administrator, and moderator. Before each of these methods, I'm going to use the class method decorator to turn these into a class method. Each class method takes the necessary information to create a user, like username and email, and it gives back an instance of the user class with the right settings and permissions for that type of user. These class methods keep all the user creation logic neatly tucked inside the class, which helps keep our code organized. And if you need to tweak how a certain type of user is created in the future, like adding more permissions or checking inputs, you can actually do it right within the class method without having to mess around with all the other parts of your code. I tried to explain the scenario. I hope I did a decent job. Class methods offer a neat and effective way to create different types of users. So before we sum out today, let's answer some popular questions that I get asked in the classroom. I don't know why you would have missed it, but if you did, a Python decorator, what is it and why is it used? Go ahead, pause this podcast. Tell me, why? Python decorators are functions that modify the behavior of other functions or methods. They are used to add functionality to existing code. They do not alter its initial state. So I popularly use decorators for logging or caching, right? Even access control, like I gave in today's scenario, right? While you can use one, we can also combine multiple decorators in Python, right? So decorators can be stacked on top of each other to apply multiple transformations to a function or a method. However, guys, that sounds complicated. It's because it's going to confuse your code too. Be careful with this. The order of decorators may affect their behavior, so it's essential to consider the execution sequence. Okay, so let's sum it up for today's episode. right? What was the topic? Class methods. They're really handy in Python programming. They make your code better by letting you add extra features, make it run faster, and make it easier to understand. When you use special decorators like static method or today class method, you tidy up your code. You make it easier to read and faster to run. We know how Python can be a bit slow, but that's because you're coding the slow way. You can make it so much faster. Knowing how to use class method decorators, well, it isn't just helpful. It's essential for Python programmers who want to improve the quality and the speed of their code. That's why I talked about it in today's episode. Guys, if you enjoyed this, do me a favor, click the like button on whatever platform you're listening on, right? That really helps this podcast reach more people. And comment, let me know what you think, because really this podcast goes through my articles that I have down in the link in the description. Head on down there and check out the newsletter, as well as all the resources I have available to you guys. This podcast is for all you listeners out there. I know we learn in different ways, so I'm curious, how do you learn best? Drop a comment below and let me know. Thank you guys for tuning in for another episode of PyPod Chronicles. Until next time.